What's the most ridiculous thing your sister made you do? She grabbed my hand and said, "You need to call off your engagement right now because I'm the older sister and I get married first. Cancel everything or I'll make sure your wedding never happens." I started laughing without meaning to. I'd been with Ryson for 6 years and she'd only been dating her boyfriend for 3 months. "I'm not canceling my wedding because you think there's an order," I said. "It's not what I think. It's how families work," she said, trying to pull the ring off my finger. "I'm 28 and you're 25, so you wait your turn." "That's insane," I said, yanking my hand back. "Either you postpone until after I'm married or I'll destroy your relationship," she said. "Mom agrees that it's humiliating for me to be the single older sister at your wedding." I left with my fiancé and we spent the whole day imitating her and cracking ourselves up. But we had no idea the nightmare that we'd just stepped into. 3 weeks later, we got notified that my sister was suing us for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming my engagement was designed to humiliate her and destroy her romantic prospects. She hired a lawyer who argued that younger siblings getting married first caused documented psychological damage to older siblings, and she demanded a restraining order preventing me from planning any wedding activities until she was married. She brought her boyfriend to court and tried to force him to propose right there in front of the judge, but he said they'd only been dating 12 weeks and walked out. The judge dismissed everything immediately, but she filed complaints with every venue in town saying I was committing fraud by booking them under false pretenses since she was supposed to get married first. After months of harassment, she showed up at my bridal shower with a wedding dress on, announcing that she was getting married that same day to a man she'd met online the night before. She'd hired someone from Craigslist to be her groom, paying him $500 to go through with a ceremony in my parents' backyard during my party. She tried to force all my guests to watch her get married first, but the guy took the money and left when he realized she was unstable. She chased him down the street in the wedding dress, screaming that he was ruining her life, then came back and set up a projector showing a PowerPoint about birth order and marriage statistics, while my bridesmaids sat there stunned. The week before my wedding, she broke into the venue to set up her own wedding decorations over mine, convinced she could have her wedding there first. She was dragging in a massive arch made of fake flowers she'd built herself, but it was so heavy and unwieldy that she couldn't control it. She tried to hoist it up the main staircase but lost her grip, and it rolled back down, taking her with it like a human bowling ball. She tumbled down 3 flights tangled in tulle and artificial roses, then got up and tried again with an even bigger arch. This time she made it to the ballroom but tripped over her own decoration box and crashed through the wedding cake table, then bounced off and went flying into the chocolate fountain she was trying to replace with her own. She got up covered in chocolate and tried to hang her Sarah's wedding banner, but grabbed the wrong rope and pulled down the entire ceiling drapery on herself. She was so tangled in fabric that she couldn't see and walked straight into the DJ booth, electrocuting herself on the sound equipment and short-circuiting the entire building. The shock made her hair stand straight up and fried her nervous system so badly that half her face wouldn't move properly anymore. "You did this to my face because you couldn't wait your turn," she said from her hospital bed, her hair still sticking up in patches and her face twitching from the electrical damage. "I'll never get married now because you had to go first." "How is any of this my fault when I wasn't even there?" I said, but my mom squeezed my arm hard. "Your sister's face is paralyzed because you refused to respect birth order," she said while my sister tried to cry, but only one eye would close. I got married at a different venue but couldn't smile in any of the photos because my entire family spent the ceremony in the hospital with my sister. They posted pictures of her singed hair and twitching face next to my wedding photos, saying I'd stolen her chance at love by refusing to wait. My husband's family whispered about what kind of person would drive their sister to break into a venue, and even my own bridesmaids said they felt guilty celebrating while my sister was suffering. The wedding video showed empty seats where my family should have been, and my mom's speech via phone from the hospital was about how some people couldn't wait their turn. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had spun out of control, but I had no idea how much worse things would still get. I spent that whole week staring at our apartment walls instead of the wedding album. The photographer had sent the digital files and I opened them once, saw row after row of empty chairs where my family should have been sitting, and closed my laptop so fast I nearly cracked the screen. Ryson found me sitting on the couch just holding my phone, scrolling through nothing, and he sat down next to me without saying anything for a while. When his coworker asked him how the wedding went, he told me later that night, and I watched him struggle to figure out what to say. He settled on saying it was beautiful but complicated, which made me feel worse because I knew he was protecting me from having to explain the whole mess again. My boss asked me the same question when I got back to work, and I gave her some version about family emergency, medical situation. Everything worked out fine, and she looked at me like she knew I was lying but didn't want to push. Every single conversation felt like I was on trial, having to justify why my own mother and sister weren't at my wedding, and I was so tired of defending choices I didn't even make. The venue manager called on Thursday morning while I was eating cereal and staring at nothing. She said she was really sorry to bother me, but they needed to file an insurance claim for the property damage, and they needed a statement from me about what happened. I felt my whole body go cold because I thought once the wedding was over, once we'd moved to a different venue and gotten married anyway, that this would all just fade away into an embarrassing family story we'd laugh about someday. But she was talking about broken equipment and ruined decorations and electrical system repairs, and I realized this wasn't fading away at all. She asked if I could write down everything I knew about the break-in and my sister's threats, and I said yes, even though my hands were shaking. I sat at my desk that afternoon with a blank document open and started typing everything the venue staff had told me about finding Sienna dragging that massive flower arch up the stairs, the destroyed cake table where she'd crashed through trying to set up her own decorations, the chocolate fountain she'd knocked over and gotten covered in, the ceiling drapes she'd pulled down on herself, the DJ booth and sound equipment where she'd electrocuted herself badly enough to short out the whole building. I wrote about her texts saying she'd destroy my wedding, about the complaints she'd filed with every venue in town, about showing up at my bridal shower in a wedding dress with a hired groom from Craigslist. It took me 3 hours to write it all down, and when I finished, I just sat there looking at 5 pages of completely insane behavior laid out in plain text. An insurance adjuster called 3 days later, asking for a recorded phone statement. My stomach twisted when I saw the unknown number and heard her introduce herself, and I almost asked if we could do it another time. But Ryson grabbed my hand and mouthed that he'd stay with me. She asked me to describe the events leading up to the break-in, and I walked her through the whole timeline, starting with Sienna demanding I cancel my engagement because she was older. Ryson sat next to me on the couch squeezing my hand while I talked about the lawsuit, the venue complaints, the bridal shower disaster, all of it. The adjuster asked specific questions about whether Sienna had made direct threats, and I told her yes, multiple times, that Sienna had said she'd make sure my wedding never happened. When we hung up, I felt shaky and weird, like I'd just testified in court against my own sister, which I guess in a way I had. Victoria called that same evening, and I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring her would just make things worse. She was crying before I even said hello, saying the insurance company was going after Sienna for $15,000 in damages, and how could I let this happen? I tried to explain that I didn't have any control over what the venue decided to do, but she just kept saying that my sister was suffering enough, that I'd gotten my wedding, so wasn't that enough? Like I was being greedy by not stopping a business from seeking compensation for actual property damage. She said Sienna's face was still partially paralyzed, and her hair was still growing back weird, and now she had this massive debt hanging over her, all because I couldn't wait my turn to get married. I felt that familiar guilt start creeping in, that voice saying maybe I should have just postponed, maybe I should have avoided all of this. But then I remembered I didn't break into anything or destroy anyone's property. I told Victoria that Sienna made her own choices and I couldn't control the consequences of those choices, that breaking into a private venue was illegal and dangerous, and the business had every right to protect themselves. She just cried harder and said I was being cruel and heartless, and then she hung up on me. I stood there holding my phone, and Ryson came over and wrapped his arms around me, and I just let him hold me while I felt guilty about something that wasn't my fault. His parents invited us over for dinner on Saturday, and I knew it wasn't just a casual family meal. We sat in their dining room and Jason asked me directly what really happened with my sister, and I could tell from his tone that he'd been hearing things, probably from relatives or family friends, and he wanted the truth. I could see the worry on his face, like he was thinking this drama was going to follow their son forever, and I didn't blame him for being concerned. I pulled out my phone and showed them the timeline I'd been keeping, all the screenshots of texts and the lawsuit paperwork and the venue complaints. Jason's face changed as he scrolled through everything, his eyebrows going up higher and higher, and when he got to the part about the fake wedding invitation with no groom's name, he actually said a curse word under his breath. He looked up at me and said this was actual harassment, not just family conflict, that what my sister had done went way beyond normal family drama. Brielle took the phone from him and read through everything herself, and when she finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand and apologized for doubting me. She said they should have trusted their son's judgment from the start instead of assuming I was exaggerating or being dramatic, and it felt so good to have someone actually believe me without me having to defend every single detail. But I was also completely exhausted from having to prove myself over and over, from showing documentation like I was on trial, from watching people's faces change from skeptical to understanding only after they saw physical evidence. My former bridesmaid Alexis texted me Sunday night saying she needed space from the drama and thought it was best if we didn't hang out for a while. I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over, and I wasn't surprised because she'd been distant ever since Sienna crashed the bridal shower, but it still hurt. She'd been one of my closest friends, and now she was backing away because my family situation was too messy, too complicated, too much drama for her to deal with. I didn't respond to her text because I didn't know what to say, and Ryson found me sitting on the bathroom floor just holding my phone and looking at nothing. I woke up at 3 in the morning from another dream where Sienna was standing outside our bedroom window, and I couldn't fall back asleep after that. Ryson found me sitting on the couch at 5 in the morning just staring at the door, and he sat down next to me without saying anything for a while. He finally suggested we get a Ring doorbell camera so I could at least see if anyone was actually out there, and I hated that we needed something like that, but I nodded right away. We ordered it that morning and paid extra for same-day delivery because I couldn't stand another night of jumping at every sound in the hallway. The camera arrived that afternoon and Ryson installed it while I watched the instructions on my phone, and as soon as it was connected, I felt a tiny bit of the tension in my chest loosen. I checked the app about 15 times that first hour, just watching the empty hallway and feeling ridiculous, but also relieved that I could see there was nothing there. That night, I actually slept for 6 hours straight, which was the most I'd managed since the wedding, and when I woke up, the first thing I did was check the camera footage to make sure nothing had happened while I was asleep. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from Kathleen, and when I opened it, I saw she'd sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post. Sienna had posted a whole album of hospital photos, showing her singed hair sticking up in patches, and her face with one side drooping. And the caption said something about younger sisters, who refused to respect birth order and the consequences that follow. I scrolled through the comments and felt sick seeing how many people were arguing about whether I was heartless or whether Sienna was unstable. Like my entire family situation was just entertainment for strangers on the internet. Some people were calling Sienna crazy and saying she did it to herself, but others were writing long paragraphs about how I should have postponed my wedding and how family comes first. I took screenshots of the whole thing with shaking hands, and then Kathleen sent me another message telling me I needed to document everything. She was right, so I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled with the date, and I started going through my phone to screenshot every text message and social media post I could find. I saved the lawsuit papers as PDFs and added them to the folder, then went through my email to find all the venue complaints and the correspondence with the wedding coordinator. It took me 2 hours to organize everything, and by the end I had a folder with 43 files showing the complete timeline of Sienna's behavior over the past 6 months. I felt exhausted looking at it all laid out like that, but also weirdly validated that I wasn't making this up or exaggerating, that it really had been this bad. The next morning, I got an email from the venue manager asking if I'd be willing to provide a witness statement for their civil claim against Sienna. They were filing for property damage and wanted my account of the threats she'd made about destroying my wedding and having her own ceremony there first. I responded within an hour saying yes, that I'd be happy to help, because they'd been nothing but professional and kind during the whole nightmare, and they deserved to be paid back for everything Sienna had broken. I spent that evening writing out a detailed statement about every threat Sienna had made, every complaint she'd filed, and her stated intention to have her wedding at my venue before mine could happen. It felt strange putting it all into formal language like I was testifying in court, but I kept everything factual and included specific dates and quotes from her texts. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a group text from Victoria, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. She'd sent a message to me, Ryson, and about 8 other relatives saying that family comes before everything, and demanding that I write a public apology for putting my wedding before Sienna's well-being. The text went on about how Sienna was suffering, and how I needed to take responsibility for what happened to her face, and she wanted me to post the apology on Facebook where everyone could see it. I didn't respond, but I felt my stomach churning as I read it over and over, and I forwarded the text to Ryson, who was still at work. About 20 minutes later, Ryson replied to the whole group text with a message saying that Sienna broke into private property and injured herself, and that wasn't anyone's fault, but hers. My phone started ringing immediately, and I saw it was Victoria calling, but I let it go to voicemail because I couldn't handle talking to her right then. She left a 3-minute message calling Ryson disrespectful and saying he was turning me against my family, that a good husband would encourage me to make peace with my sister instead of making things worse. I saved the voicemail and added it to my documentation folder. Then I turned off my phone for the rest of the night because I couldn't deal with any more messages. That weekend, I spent both Saturday and Sunday going through everything on my phone and organizing it all into a clear timeline. I had the original lawsuit papers where Sienna claimed my engagement was designed to humiliate her, then all the venue complaints she filed trying to stop my bookings, then the whole incident with the Craigslist groom she tried to hire for $500. I added the photos from my bridal shower where she'd set up a projector and showed that PowerPoint about birth order and marriage statistics, and then all the documentation from the venue break-in, including the police report and the photos of the damage she'd caused. By Sunday night, I had everything arranged by date in a single document that was 12 pages long, and looking at it all together made me realize just how much had actually happened in such a short time. Monday morning, I was at my desk at work when I got an email from HR saying they'd received an anonymous complaint about me. The email said someone had accused me of harassing a family member and creating a hostile work environment by talking about personal family matters at work. I felt like I might throw up reading it because I knew immediately it was either Sienna or Victoria trying to mess with my job, trying to make me look bad to my employer and get me in trouble. I forwarded the email to Ryson right away, and we both knew I needed to get ahead of this before it turned into something worse. I requested a meeting with my supervisor for that afternoon, and spent my lunch break printing out the entire timeline I'd created, all 12 pages showing every single thing Sienna had done over the past 6 months. When I sat down in my supervisor's office, I was shaking, but I handed her the printed timeline and explained that my sister had been escalating her behavior for months, and now she was trying to interfere with my job. My supervisor read through the whole thing carefully, her eyebrows going up higher with each page, and when she finished, she looked up at me and said this clearly wasn't workplace harassment at all. She said it was obviously a personal family matter where I was the victim, not the person causing problems, and she promised to respond to HR with context about what was really happening. She asked me to let her know if anything else happened, and to keep documenting everything, And when I left her office, I felt like I could finally breathe again, knowing my job wasn't in danger. That night, Kathleen showed up at our apartment with 2 bottles of wine and a bag of Chinese takeout. She set everything on the kitchen counter and gave me a long hug before either of us said anything. We sat on the couch with our food, and I went through the whole timeline with her, showing her every screenshot and document I'd saved. She listened without interrupting, her face getting more serious as I explained each incident. When I finished, she asked if I'd thought about getting a restraining order, and I admitted I'd been considering it, but I was scared of how Victoria would react. Kathleen pointed out that Victoria was already blaming me for everything, so a restraining order couldn't make things much worse, but I wasn't sure I believed that. We finished the wine and she helped me clean up before she left, telling me to call her anytime I needed to talk. After she was gone, I sat at my laptop and started searching for information about restraining orders. I read through legal websites and court documents trying to understand what I'd need to prove. The requirements kept mentioning a pattern of harassment and reasonable fear for my safety, and I definitely had both of those things documented. The venue break-in alone proved that Sienna's behavior was getting worse instead of better. I made notes about the legal process and saved links to helpful articles. Then I closed my laptop feeling more informed but also more anxious about actually taking that step. Ryson and I stayed up late talking about whether a restraining order would help or just make everything worse. He thought it was necessary to set legal boundaries since nothing else had stopped Sienna's behavior. I kept worrying about what it would do to my relationship with Victoria, even though that relationship was already pretty destroyed. Ryson reminded me that Victoria had chosen to enable Sienna's actions and blame me for the consequences, so I couldn't keep sacrificing my safety to protect her feelings. We went back and forth for over an hour before finally going to bed without making a firm decision. The next morning, I looked up the courthouse address and found out they had a self-help clinic for people filing restraining orders. I decided I could at least go learn about the process without committing to anything. During my lunch break, I drove downtown and found the right office. A volunteer attorney sat with me and reviewed all my documentation, nodding as she read through the timeline. She said I had a strong case for a temporary restraining order and handed me a stack of forms to fill out. I took the forms home and put them on my desk, still not sure if I was ready to file them. When I got home from work the following day, I found a fancy cream-colored envelope on our doorstep. It was addressed to both me and Ryson in elaborate calligraphy. I opened it and pulled out a wedding invitation printed on thick cardstock with gold edges. The invitation announced Sienna's wedding to someone described only as a wonderful man, with a date exactly 3 weeks away. There was no groom's name listed anywhere on the card, no return address, and no RSVP information. I stood there staring at it, trying to figure out what game she was playing now. I brought the invitation inside and took photos of it from multiple angles with my phone. Then I opened my documentation folder on my laptop and added the photos with notes about when and where I'd found it. The whole thing felt like another manipulation tactic, another attempt to prove she was getting married first, even though there was clearly no actual wedding being planned. I put the physical invitation in a manila folder with all my other printed evidence and tried not to think about what ridiculous stunt might come next. That weekend, I sat down and drafted a formal letter to Sienna. I kept the language simple and clear, stating that I was requesting no further contact from her except through attorneys or a professional mediator. I explained that her continued harassment was affecting my mental health and my marriage, and that I needed her to respect my boundaries. Ryson read it over and made a few suggestions to keep the tone neutral and factual. We printed it out, signed it, and took it to the post office to send via certified mail so we'd have proof she received it. 2 days after we mailed the letter, I was scrolling through Facebook during my morning coffee when I saw that Sienna had tagged Ryson's employer in a public post. My stomach dropped as I read her words claiming that Ryson was complicit in emotional abuse and that his company should know they employed someone who supported family destruction. She'd written multiple paragraphs accusing him of turning me against my family and enabling my cruel behavior toward my injured sister. I felt a mix of rage and terror thinking about how this could affect his job and his reputation. I immediately texted Ryson a screenshot of the post, and he called me back within minutes. He said he was going straight to his boss in HR before they even saw the Facebook post. He'd already prepared a folder with all our documentation just in case something like this happened. An hour later, he texted that his boss had been understanding and said they sometimes got crazy social media complaints that didn't mean anything. His HR representative had looked through the evidence and agreed that this was clearly a personal family matter where Ryson was targeted. Even though his job seemed safe, Ryson sounded shaken when he called me that evening, upset by how far Sienna was willing to go to hurt us. We spent the entire weekend organizing our documentation into a clear timeline with specific categories. I created sections for legal actions, property damage, social media harassment, workplace interference, and unwanted contact. Under each category, I listed every incident with dates, descriptions, and supporting evidence like screenshots or police reports. By Sunday afternoon, we had a comprehensive document that was over 20 pages long. Looking at everything laid out together was depressing, because it showed just how much had happened in such a short time, but it was also helpful to see the clear pattern of escalating behavior. The next morning, Victoria called while I was making coffee. She asked me to meet her at Sienna's neurologist appointment to talk like a family. I felt suspicious right away, but agreed to meet at the medical building because I figured a public place with doctors around might keep things calm. I drove there after work and found them in the waiting room. Sienna sat slumped in a chair with her face still drooping on one side. Victoria stood up as soon as she saw me and walked over with this tight smile that made my stomach hurt. We went into the exam room when they called Sienna's name, and the doctor checked her facial movement and asked questions about her recovery. As soon as the doctor left, Victoria turned to me and started talking about how I needed to apologize publicly for what happened and help pay for Sienna's ongoing medical bills. Sienna nodded along with everything Victoria said, making sure her droopy side faced me the whole time. I stayed as calm as I could and said I was sorry she got hurt, but I didn't cause the break-in or the injuries. Victoria's face turned red and she said I was being cruel to someone with a disability. I told them both that any future talk needed to be in writing and respectful, and that I was setting clear limits for my own health. Sienna started crying with only one eye making tears, and it looked so weird that I almost felt bad until I remembered she broke into my venue. Victoria told me to leave if I was going to be heartless. I walked out feeling shaky but also kind of proud that I'd said what I needed to say. Ryson picked me up in the parking lot and I cried in the car, not because I thought I was wrong but because it hurt. So much to have my mother look at me with that much anger in her eyes. 3 days later, a letter showed up at our apartment addressed to both of us. I opened it and saw it was supposed to be some kind of legal demand. The whole thing was clearly copied from the internet with blanks filled in with our names. It demanded I pay for Sienna's medical bills and make a public apology or face more legal action. I scanned the pages and added them to the documentation folder on my laptop. Ryson looked over my shoulder and we both recognized right away that it wasn't from a real lawyer, just Sienna trying to sound scary and official. The next day, the venue's lawyer sent me an email saying they were filing a civil claim against Sienna for property damage. They asked if I would give a statement and I agreed immediately because the venue staff had tried so hard to protect my wedding day. I sat down that evening and wrote out everything I could remember about Sienna's threats to destroy my wedding, all the complaints she filed trying to stop my bookings, and how she'd told people she was going to have her own wedding at my venue first. I included dates and screenshots and sent the whole thing to the lawyer's office. 2 days later, Victoria called and started screaming before I could even say hello. She yelled that I was trying to bankrupt my own sister by helping with the lawsuit. I stayed calm and explained that Sienna caused real damage to a business, and they had every right to try to get money back for what she destroyed. Victoria kept yelling, so I hung up and turned my phone off for the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Kathleen with a link and the message, "You need to see this." I clicked it, and found myself staring at a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Me Recover from Wedding Injury," with photos of Sienna's face showing the drooping side and patchy singed hair. The story she wrote claimed she was trying to prepare a surprise for her younger sister when the accident happened, and now she needed help with medical bills and recovery costs. I read through it twice, feeling sick to my stomach because she made it sound like she was doing something nice for me, when really she'd broken into my venue to sabotage my wedding. The donation total showed over $2,000 from people who believed her twisted version of events. I took screenshots and added them to my documentation folder while my hands shook with anger. Ryson read over my shoulder and said we should report it for fraud, but I wasn't sure that would do anything except make things worse. I spent an hour refreshing the page watching more donations come in from strangers who had no idea what really happened. Some people left comments saying things like, "What a thoughtful sister," and "I hope you recover soon." And it made me want to scream that she wasn't thoughtful at all. She was trying to steal my wedding day. I finally closed the page and tried to focus on work, but I kept thinking about all those people giving her money based on lies. 3 days later, Kathleen sent me another link with just a skull emoji. A local gossip blog had picked up the GoFundMe story and written an article titled, "Sister Wedding War Ends in Injury," with photos of Sienna's face next to my wedding announcement. The article laid out both sides, but the writer clearly thought it was entertaining drama, and didn't seem to care about the truth. The comment section had over 300 responses, and I made the mistake of reading through them. People were split between calling Sienna crazy and calling me a monster for letting my sister get hurt. Someone wrote, "What kind of person refuses to wait their turn and then doesn't even help with medical bills?" And it had 50 likes. Another comment said, "The younger sister sounds like a selfish bridezilla who cares more about a party than family," and people were agreeing in the replies. I felt exposed and sick seeing strangers debate whether I was a terrible person when they didn't know anything about the months of harassment or the break-in or the lawsuit. My face felt hot and my stomach hurt, and I had to close my laptop because I couldn't read anymore. Kathleen came over that evening with wine and made me sit on the couch while she read through the whole documentation folder I'd been keeping. She told me that anyone who actually read the facts would see the truth, and that internet strangers didn't matter, but it still hurt to be portrayed as a villain in some story for people's entertainment. Ryson suggested we stay with his parents for a few days to get away from everything, but I said no immediately. This was our home and our apartment, and I refused to let Sienna's chaos drive me out of it. I told him I wasn't going to hide or run away just because my sister was making up stories online. He understood, but I could tell he was worried about me because I wasn't sleeping well, and I kept checking the blog comments even though it made me feel worse. Instead of leaving, we decided to schedule an intake appointment with a couples counselor that Brielle had recommended. We needed help figuring out how to handle the situation as a team without letting it damage our new marriage. I called the therapist's office the next morning and got an appointment for the following week. The The receptionist asked what we needed help with, and I said family conflict and boundary issues because I didn't want to explain the whole mess over the phone. Ryson and I spent that evening making a list of everything we wanted to talk about in therapy, including how to deal with Victoria's blame and Sienna's escalating behavior, and the guilt I felt even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. The therapist's office was in a quiet building downtown with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that was probably supposed to be calming. We sat together on a couch while the therapist asked us to explain what brought us in. Ryson and I took turns walking through the whole story, starting with Sienna's demand that I cancel my engagement and going all the way through the venue break-in and the hospital and the GoFundMe. The therapist took notes and asked clarifying questions, but mostly just listened while we talked for almost 40 minutes straight. When we finished, she said we were dealing with a family member who had poor boundaries and a parent who enabled destructive behavior instead of setting limits. She told us that Sienna's obsession with birth order and her escalating actions showed a pattern that would likely continue without serious intervention. She recommended we pursue the restraining order we'd been considering and create a written protocol for any family communication that did happen. She also said Victoria's enabling was preventing Sienna from facing consequences and learning better behavior. Hearing a professional validate that we weren't overreacting helped both of us feel less crazy, because so many people had acted like we were making a big deal out of nothing. The therapist gave us homework to write out our ideal boundaries and what consequences we would enforce if they were violated. She said we needed to be on the same page as a couple about what we would and wouldn't accept from my family. Ryson and I left feeling lighter somehow, like someone finally understood what we'd been dealing with. We went to dinner at a quiet restaurant and actually talked about other things for the first time in weeks. We made plans for a weekend trip and talked about redecorating the apartment, and it felt good to focus on our life together instead of the constant drama. That night, we worked on the boundary homework together, writing down things like no unannounced visits, no social media posts about us, all communication in writing, and no contact with our workplaces. We listed consequences like blocking phone numbers, pursuing legal action, and cutting off contact completely if needed. I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with a Ring camera alert. I pulled up the app and felt my whole body go cold seeing Sienna standing on the sidewalk outside our building. She was just staring up at our windows with her arms crossed and that droopy side of her face visible even in the camera's night vision. I grabbed Ryson's arm and showed him the screen, and he immediately said to call the police. I dialed the non-emergency line with shaking hands and told the dispatcher that my sister was outside my building, and I had concerns about her showing up after months of harassment. The dispatcher said they would send officers to check it out and asked me to stay inside. I kept watching the Ring camera feed while we waited, and Sienna just stood there looking up at our apartment. She didn't try to come in the building or do anything threatening, but something about her just standing there watching made my skin crawl. 2 police officers arrived about 15 minutes later, and I watched on the camera as they approached Sienna. She turned to face them, and I could see her talking, but couldn't hear what she was saying. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes before one officer gestured toward the street, and Sienna finally walked away. One of the officers came up to our apartment and knocked on the door. I let him in, and he explained that Sienna claimed she just wanted to check on her sister and make sure I was okay. He said they told her she needed to leave and not come back, and that if she returned, we should call immediately. He gave me an incident report number and said to document what happened in case we needed it later. I thanked him and closed the door, and then just stood there in the hallway trying to process what had just happened. I was shaking even though Sienna was gone and the officers had handled it. Ryson pulled me into a hug, and I could feel my heart pounding against his chest. He said this proved we needed the restraining order, and I finally agreed completely without any hesitation or guilt. I was done trying to manage this on my own, or hoping things would get better. Sienna had shown up at our home after being told to stay away, and that crossed a line I couldn't ignore anymore. We sat down right then and pulled up the restraining order paperwork I'd gotten from the courthouse weeks ago. I filled out every section with details about the harassment and the threats, and now this incident with her showing up outside our building. Ryson read over it when I finished and said it was clear and thorough, and that any judge would see the pattern. I saved the file and told myself I would go to the courthouse first thing Monday morning to file it officially. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone showing a voice memo from Sienna that was 12 minutes long. I hit play while making coffee and heard her say she was sorry for showing up at our building, but then her tone changed completely. She went on about how I'd always been jealous of her since we were kids, and how I couldn't stand not being the center of attention. She said I planned my engagement to steal her spotlight and that I'd been manipulating everyone against her for years. She kept talking about how I was the favorite child, and how nothing was ever good enough for me unless it hurt her. I saved the voice memo to my documentation folder without responding, and showed it to Ryson. He shook his head and said it proved she couldn't take responsibility for anything. I got dressed and gathered all my paperwork into a folder, making sure I had the police incident report from the night before, the venue damage documentation, screenshots of her social media posts, and the fake wedding invitation she'd left on our doorstep. The courthouse opened at 8, and I was there by 8:15. I went to the self-help clinic first, and told the volunteer I was ready to file for a restraining order. She reviewed my folder of evidence and said I had a very strong case with clear documentation of escalating behavior. She helped me fill out the forms properly, making sure I included specific dates and incidents with as much detail as possible. I wrote about the lawsuit, the venue complaints, the bridal shower crash, the break-in that caused her injuries, the social media harassment, the fake wedding invitation, and her showing up outside our building after being warned by police. The clerk at the filing window reviewed everything and said a judge would look at it within 2 business days to decide about a temporary order. She gave me a case number and told me to check the online portal for updates. I walked out feeling like I'd actually done something concrete to protect myself, instead of just reacting to whatever Sienna did next. 3 days went by without any word, and I kept checking the portal obsessively. On Thursday afternoon, I got an email notification that a judge had granted a temporary restraining order and scheduled a full hearing in 2 weeks. The order said Sienna had to stay at least 100 yards away from me, couldn't contact me directly or through others, and couldn't post about me on social media. A process server would deliver the papers to her within 48 hours, and she'd have a chance to respond at the hearing. I felt this huge wave of relief reading through the order because it meant there were actual legal consequences now if she kept harassing me. I called Ryson right away, and he said he was proud of me for following through even though he knew it was hard. That night we ordered takeout and watched a movie, trying to have one normal evening without talking about Sienna or Victoria or any of it. My phone rang Friday morning and I saw it was Victoria calling. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd just keep trying, so I picked up. She was crying and yelling at the same time, saying I'd destroyed this family and how could I get a restraining order against my own sister. I stayed calm and told her Sienna showed up at my home after being warned by police, and I had a right to feel safe. Victoria said I was being dramatic and that Sienna just wanted to talk to me. I pointed out that Sienna had sent a 12-minute voice memo accusing me of being jealous and manipulative instead of actually apologizing. Victoria ignored that completely and said families work through problems together, not by getting the courts involved. I told her I'd tried working through it and Sienna kept escalating, so now I needed legal protection. Victoria's voice got cold and she said if I really cared about this family, I'd drop the restraining order and stop punishing Sienna for being hurt. The next call from Victoria came 2 days later, and this time she didn't bother with crying first. She said if I didn't drop the restraining order, she was cutting me off completely, and I'd never be welcome in her home again. I felt this horrible, tight feeling in my chest, because even though Victoria had been awful through all of this, she was still my mom. But I told her that was her choice to make, and I wasn't backing down on protecting myself. She said I'd regret choosing Ryson's family over my own, and that someday I'd understand what it felt like to have a child turn against me. I said I wasn't turning against anyone. I was just setting boundaries, but she hung up before I finished talking. I sat on the couch staring at my phone, and Ryson came over and hugged me. He didn't say anything, just held me while I cried about losing my mom, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. That evening, Ryson and I decided to rearrange our apartment and take down some of the wedding photos that reminded us of all the drama. We moved the couch to a different wall and switched around some of the furniture to make the space feel different. I took down the big framed photo from our ceremony that showed all those empty seats where my family should have been, and replaced it with a picture of just me and Ryson from our honeymoon. We put away the album that Victoria's hospital speech was in, and kept out only the photos with Ryson's family and my friends who'd actually been there for us. It felt good to reclaim our space and make it about our marriage instead of about the conflict with Sienna. We ordered pizza and sat on the newly arranged couch, and it actually felt like our home again, instead of a place defined by family drama. Kathleen sent me a text Saturday asking how I was doing with everything. I wrote back honestly that I was sad about Victoria threatening to cut me off, but also relieved to have legal protection now. She replied saying she was sorry I was dealing with this and asked if I wanted company for the restraining order hearing. I told her I'd love to have her there for support, and I was grateful to have a friend who actually showed up instead of disappearing when things got messy. She sent back a heart emoji and said she'd mark her calendar for the hearing date. It meant a lot to know someone outside of Ryson's family believed me, and didn't think I was overreacting or being cruel to Sienna. The civil damages hearing happened on a Tuesday morning, and I didn't have to be there since it was between the venue and Sienna. Ryson checked the court website that afternoon and saw that Sienna hadn't shown up to defend herself. The judge entered a default judgment against her for the full amount of property damage, which came to about $15,000 for the destroyed cake table, the chocolate fountain, the ceiling drapes, and the electrical system repairs. The venue had documented everything with photos and repair bills, so the judge didn't have any trouble deciding. I felt bad for about 5 minutes thinking about Sienna owing that much money, but then I remembered she'd made the choice to break into private property and destroy things, and the venue had a right to be compensated. Victoria called me that same evening absolutely furious about the judgment. She said Sienna couldn't afford to pay $15,000, and how dare the venue sue her when she was already suffering from her injuries. I pointed out that Sienna made the choice to break in and destroy property, and I had nothing to do with the venue's decision to sue for damages. Victoria said I could have asked them not to pursue it, and that I was letting my sister get financially ruined. I told her Sienna was an adult who made her own decisions and had to face the consequences. Then I ended the call before she could keep yelling at me. Ryson said I handled it well and that Victoria was just trying to make me feel guilty for things that weren't my responsibility. I found out through a cousin's text message that Victoria was quietly helping Sienna set up a payment plan for the judgment. The cousin said Victoria was paying half, and Sienna was supposed to cover the rest over 2 years. Part of me felt bad knowing Victoria was spending her money to fix Sienna's mess, but mostly I was just tired of the whole situation and ready for the restraining order hearing so I could have some legal protection and move on with my life. I found out about the psychiatrist thing from my cousin who still talks to me sometimes. She texted saying Sienna's neurologist wrote a referral for mental health treatment, and apparently the court made it part of avoiding criminal charges for the venue break-in. The prosecutor offered her a deal where if she completed treatment and paid the damages, she wouldn't get a trespassing conviction on her record. My cousin said Victoria was mad about it because she didn't think Sienna needed therapy, just understanding from her ungrateful sister. I saved the text message even though it was just gossip because it felt important to know what was happening. Ryson said maybe professional help would actually change things and Sienna would get better, but I didn't let myself hope too much because I'd been disappointed before. The restraining order hearing finally happened on a Thursday morning 2 weeks later. I got there early with Ryson and Kathleen, and we sat in the hallway outside the courtroom going through my folder one more time. Sienna showed up 10 minutes before the hearing with Victoria holding her arm like she needed support. Neither of them had a lawyer, which surprised me because Victoria usually made everything as dramatic as possible. The bailiff called us in, and we all sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 50s who looked tired and asked me to present my evidence first. I handed over the timeline, the screenshots, the police reports, the venue documentation, and the certified mail receipt from my no-contact letter. She read through everything while the courtroom stayed completely quiet, except for the sound of pages turning. Then she asked Sienna if she had anything to say, and Sienna stood up with her face still drooping on one side. She started talking about birth order and family traditions and how I'd humiliated her, but the judge cut her off and asked if she had any evidence that I'd threatened or harassed her. Sienna couldn't answer that, so she just said I'd caused her emotional distress by getting engaged. The judge looked at Victoria and asked if she wanted to add anything, and Victoria said I was tearing the family apart by refusing to respect my older sister. The judge flipped through my evidence again and said she was granting a 1-year restraining order with a 100-yard distance requirement. Sienna had to stay away from me, Ryson, our home, and our workplaces. If she violated it, even once she'd face criminal charges. Victoria started crying and saying this was cruel, but the judge said the hearing was over. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. Kathleen hugged me and Ryson squeezed my hand. The restraining order wasn't going to magically fix my family or make Victoria stop blaming me or undo all the damage from the past year. But it gave me legal protection and clear boundaries, and right now that felt like enough. And that's the end for now. Thanks for spending a little time here. It honestly makes telling these stories worthwhile. I hope you walk away feeling lighter than before. Subscribe if you'd like to keep the good energy going.